welcome Ian from Unisono. I believe you're also going through a name change at the moment called Sophie Hub as well?
That's correct. So Unisono will be the company name for the near future. We will be calling the product that we have within the assisted living space Sophie, and hence the logo that you see on the screen there today. So our new website and so forth will all be represented by Sophie.
So as all things in technology, they do sort of change quickly. By way of introduction, Ian is, can I use the term veteran in the technology space? As a director level of both Cisco and Samsung in Australia in the design area, and currently with Unisono and Sophie Hub. And for those of you that don't know, Sophie Hub is a commercial spin-out from Deakin University Research into artificial intelligence, and leveraging this strong research background sort of into the care facility. But look, before we go into that and tell us a little bit about AI, Ian, can you tell us what brought you to AI and Sophie Hub and Unisono?
Certainly. So this is an endeavor that's been going on for a number of years now. I had the privilege of meeting the gentleman that invented the product or the service quite a number of years ago while I was working at Samsung. Obviously, the opportunity there was one of an enormous importance. It's been an interest in my life to build companies, to do good things. And I have to admit, as my parents are getting older now, they're in their 90s, and I look at the concerns that the adult children that they now have with regards to their care and the perception of risk for them is one that's uppermost in all of our minds. And when we saw the opportunity with the university to provide some real technology to deliver real results in that space, I jumped to the opportunity. And I must say that I'm very pleased with the journey that we've traveled so far. I'm certainly looking forward to how this moves out for the rest of this year and into the next few years.
So it's interesting when we sort of talk about AI. There was a sort of an IBIS World Report. So for those of you who don't know IBIS, they're sort of a research house based in Melbourne, Australia. And the definition, if we go to the definition of AI, but from their perspective, some 80% of the decisions that we currently make in a daily fashion in our day-to-day lives will be assisted or eventually able to be made by AI in the next 10 years. So what do you think from a daily perspective that really means? What are you seeing around that?
Well, I think let's broaden the discussion. Let's take it way beyond what we're talking about with regards to healthcare and assisted living. If you were to look at things from an AI perspective, we are right now witnessing the birth of the fourth iteration of the Industrial Revolution. Now, that's a very bold claim, but I think it's a realistic one. Every pundit that's out there, I should mention that's not my quote, that's someone else's quote, but I think it is very realistic. But it is a profound moment, and I'm not overplaying the importance of AI here, but we're now at a point where computers are starting to mimic or replicate the functions of the human brain. Now, let me make that. Let me bring that down to something practical. We're not talking about a robot suddenly starting to do the things that you see in the movies. That's pie in the sky type stuff. But we are starting to see artificial intelligence doing things in the real world that will have a massive impact on our society. Let me give you two examples, if I may, Mark, because I think this is relevant, and it's one of the reasons why this space has endured for so long. In fact, for all of computing, artificial intelligence has been there right from the beginning, and it has been able to endure because people recognize that there is an enormous opportunity if it is successful. We're just starting to witness the output of that, and we're talking about a 40, 50-year journey to get us to this point. Now, let me give you some touch points in terms of where this is. People are familiar with smartphones. Most people have smartphones today, and some people use the speech recognition capability of their smartphones. If you used them 5 or 6 years ago, they were terrible. But through natural language, speech recognition, and artificial intelligence embedded in that technology has got demonstrably better. I now do not touch my phone when I'm in my car. but I talk to it. I can dictate to it, and it's pretty good. Now, by no means am I saying it's perfect, but it's pretty good. Imagine what it will be in the next few years as the machine learning capability of that actually takes to the next level. So that's a practical example of artificial intelligence that exists today. Another one is the newish market. It's not really new, but the endeavor to actually create autonomous vehicles. There's two sides to this. There's the likes of Tesla, Mercedes, Volvo, and so forth, where they're creating vehicles that are augmenting artificial intelligence and technology into the vehicle to allow people to drive, but the computers are actually making sure that you're driving okay, and in some cases will take over for you. Collision avoidance, automatic braking, these types of things are built around some of the machine learning capability that we're talking about today. You then have the others, the Googles of this world, who are going for the big game. They're going for the complete autonomous vehicle where you won't have a steering wheel. Technically speaking, you don't really need a windscreen and so forth, but you probably will like to look at the view and so forth. But that is a full autonomous play. Now all of that is based on artificial intelligence. Now, is it a good thing? That's another question, and maybe we'll leave that to a little bit later in the interview before we approach that one.
Yeah, it's interesting when we were talking in preparation for this, and we're talking to some other care facilities and especially health providers. When you look at the definition of AI, and there's one up on the screen, obviously the simulation of intelligent behaviors in computers, or the word imitate intelligent human behavior. It's interesting that sort of the word intelligence comes in there twice. Is AI really just actually recreating the decisions that humans make, or is it actually a better decision stream because you take a few of the emotive elements out of it?
It's interesting that the name artificial intelligence conjures up all sorts of images. I think the name needs to morph into something else, if I could be blunt. We don't know how to define what intelligence is within human beings. So how should we then be able to extrapolate what artificial intelligence is if we don't know what real intelligence is? So I think the name is wrong, but I think we've got to a point in terms of computing now on two fronts. So there's two sides coalescing together. On one side, we've got computing technology where mathematical algorithms, spectacularly amazing mathematical algorithms, have been able to mimic some of the neurological functions of the brain, so just to mimic how a neuron fires. Now, those theories have been developing over many, many years, and they have definite merit. On the other side, on that same side, from the computing side, you have mathematical algorithms that have naturally evolved through the computing environment so that they learn. Now, what does learning mean? Every computer program needs to be taught its parameters, but it would be lovely if a computer program itself could identify its parameters and adjust itself from that. So machine learning is ultimately that capability. So those are more the IT-centric side of things. But on the other side, you've then got people who are looking at simulating what the human brain does. So actually building neurons on a chip. And that is probably more akin to the classic definition of artificial intelligence from science fiction writers and so forth. But in reality, both camps are working on exactly the same thing. They're trying to deliver the same types of results, but just from two different sides of the same camp. I think, though, it's fair to say, maybe to try and close off on the naming conventions associated with artificial intelligence, is to say that everybody within the space has its own definition of what it means. There is a very good wiki page out there on artificial intelligence, which has been vetted by many and is the one that most people do refer to in terms of what artificial intelligence is and so forth. I should stress, though, one thing, that the movies do have a tendency of painting all of the negative images of this, Terminator and Ex Machina and so forth. We're certainly not seeing that. We are nowhere near the maturity that we would need to get to before a machine is going to start doing those sorts of things. With that said, though, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, if you can hear squeaking in the background, it's not digital. The dog has come in. Yesterday, I couldn't get the dog in the room, and today the dog's decided to bring in its loudest squeaky toy, and it's sitting down here squeaking its toy. Not that I'm not paying attention.
So
I'm trying.
no, that's fine. You can see me. I'm in my study at home as well, and I'm waiting for my 2 dogs to come in. They haven't come in yet. So if you do hear some barking, I do apologize.
It's funny. We deal with a lot of global people. We work with great organizations around the planet, and not similar to that CNN interview where the kids are coming in with their toys in the background. We are live, but maybe not CNN live, so that's okay.
No, that's not CNN live. CNN needs to get more real. They're lesser for us.
That's right. So when you're talking about artificial intelligence in these different sectors, so obviously we're going to talk about health and care in a moment. We're seeing some great ways forward, as you said, in sort of education, finance, health and medicine, telco online, gaming and aviation. Is there any area that if you were in the health and care area that you think they should actually emulate or begin to look at as most practical for coming across into the health and care sector? Is there an industry? Obviously, there's stuff in gaming, there's stuff in adult entertainment, there's heavy industries in aviation. Is there any particular area you think the health and care market should be looking at, or are they leading in this space?
I think it's the commentary I'd give there is probably across the board. Artificial intelligence is now coming out of the lab and moving into the real world. It can be applied to pretty much anything where data either exists or data can be collected in real time. Most perceptions with regards to AI today is large volumes of data and massive amounts of number crunching. That is perfectly valid, and it exists today. But usually what happens in those particular areas is that you'd look at, for example, a health database that maybe the government or a pharmaceutical company would have, and then apply the AI methods on top of it to then deliver a particular outcome. Perfectly valid. I think, though, that there's a more real-time need that needs to be addressed in a lot of these spaces. Certainly in what we're doing within the assisted living space is more real-time based artificial intelligence based on events that are being generated now, not events that were generated, say, years ago. But both are still very applicable.
So using your car analogy, it's okay. It's one thing to go back. If you're driving on the road, you don't want the analysis for how many accidents have been here 20 years ago. You want the car to steer around it or allow for the fact that there have been 20 accidents here, so it slows down automatically, not gives you the report that there's been lots of stuff here. So it's that sort of that real-time nature. So from an AI perspective in health and care, and I know we've talked about this at numerous conferences as well. I've got a few titles up there on the screen that you can see. So if you could talk us through sort of say AI applications, say insurance or telehealth and apps that we've got there. So from an insurance perspective, that's almost in that large amounts of data.
Yeah. So well, in the insurance space, we see a massive motivation from the insurance organizations to try and assist and manage their frequent flyers. And my definition, their definition of frequent flyers, I think, is the same here. And that's the 20% of their client base, which uses up 80% of all of their resources. There is an enormous incentive for the insurance companies to try and get those people to be healthier, if at all possible. It's very difficult to do that. In a lot of cases, what we're seeing is the endeavors to try and achieve that don't actually achieve any results. This goes to the third point that you have, manual user content. What I mean by that is there's a lot of companies today that are putting together websites and data collection portals where they require the frequent flyers and the people at home to actually enter data into a website. Now, that fundamentally fails because there's no motivation for those individuals at home to waste their time going to that portal to actually key that information in. Even if they get $100 or a movie ticket or something like that, these people, in a lot of cases, are people that probably have habits that allow their condition to be exacerbated. I'm generalizing here, so please forgive me. But if we can look at artificial intelligence differently within that space of frequent flyers, now one of the research projects that the university is working on right now, we call this SASHA, is to see if there is a small percentage, a very small percentage improvement in healthcare outcomes for people suffering from type 2 diabetes, whereby we install our technology in their homes to try and prompt them to have a better dietary habit. Now, it's a very complex piece of research that's going on. It's live right now, and it's under full university ethical control. So by no means am I allowed access to the data. But all the assumption that we've based this on is if we could improve somebody's diet by a few percent, then the rate of admission or readmission into hospital goes down significantly. And as long as that is not too invasive within their home, then maybe that's something that we should be considering, particularly within that frequent flyer type basis. The other thing I mentioned, and you've got the fourth point there, lanyards, buttons, watches. I think there's a subtext to that. Within the home type environment, the technology really has not improved greatly. Yes, there's been websites, there's been apps on smartphones, but in terms of technology to actually go into the home to improve outcomes, there really hasn't been much of a way of an innovation over a 15-year period. And that is obviously an opportunity that I think ourselves at Unisono and others do see, and we're definitely going after.
Yeah, so from an AI perspective, when we're talking about apps, so there's the apps where you manually enter what you're eating, what you're doing, what your activity is, or you have a smartwatch or a button or something that then basically triggers that. But one of the really interesting things, having visited so many care facilities, is that I've seen a lot of presentations on things like remote monitoring, remote care, providing remote care. One of the great things is, are you going to have now a video feed or a data feed of 20, 50, 100 homes or individuals now coming to one place that you need to basically make sense of? So the only way you can take the next step is through some sort of active monitoring of that particular data. And that's the thing that's resonated incredibly with myself and the people that I sort of visit, is that yes, we can, it would be akin to having like 100 people on a conference call and you have to look after them and listen to them all at the same time. It's just an absolute mess. It just doesn't work. Like on this webinar with the dozens and dozens of people we have on here, there's some technology in the background making it easier. And I've got questions coming through, but I've got something making a bit of an active decision around that. So from a monitoring perspective, or from an active real-time monitoring perspective, what is it you're doing and what is it you're seeing that's going to make the greatest impact?
So you've raised some actually very difficult points there, if I may say so. Thanks for asking the hard questions. Monitoring people at home is a sensitive topic. There's privacy concerns that people have. We also need to be mindful that most technology out there today is about collecting data on people and then on selling that data. Now, if we're dealing with a video feed that's coming from someone's home, and that's exceedingly sensitive information. So as a company, as a Unisono, we made a decision many years ago that we would not implement a normal camera into our Sense technology. We think that's too much of an invasion of privacy. And no matter which way you go, I think the cohort of individuals that would be installing our system into would reject the dead eye of a camera in their home, monitoring them in their bedroom and their bathroom and so forth. So I think the industry needs to wake up to a number of fundamentals. People are entitled to be able to lead their lives in a private way, but at the same time, there is an area of duty of care to ensure that they're okay within that setting. So it is a complex issue. The other thing is the habit of companies to put everything on the cloud. They seem to think that everything on the cloud is actually a good idea. I disagree with that. You only put things on the cloud where it makes commercial sense to put it on the cloud, and it makes architectural sense to put it in the cloud. From a Unisono perspective, we as the company, we do have very small little passive sensors, little devices that we stick onto a wall that monitor motion, monitor when somebody traverses through a doorway and so forth. Those sensors send information back through to our speaker hub. I'm not sure if anybody can see the pictures that I have on my cupboard wall here, but that's the speaker that we're in the process of having produced that will house the computing technology that will run within Unisono. Now, we do have a cloud infrastructure for backup and for updates and so forth, but the live system runs in the little speaker. That's all it needs. So if we sever the connection from the internet, the system still keeps going. If you have a video monitoring service and you have a truck or a digger dig up your pavement, you lose your internet connection, you've lost your monitoring. In our view, from an architectural standpoint, that's a fail. That you cannot provide a service level agreement to somebody to say, we'll monitor you while you're at home, while at the same time not be able to guarantee that the system will stay working if it loses power or if it loses the internet connection. So we've designed this from the ground up to ensure that these things are right. The other thing I should mention at this point, and it's a little bit of a long answer, Mark, so please forgive me here, and that is the complexity of analyzing data. Now, if we were to go back 10, 15 years, there was some tremendous work done by the CSIRO in this space using C-bus technology to install a hardwired system into somebody's home, which would then provide a feed of data through to a computer, and that computer was then programmed to deliver a result. It was programmed to identify whether you're okay or not okay. Unfortunately, in that setting, all of the programming was hard coding. There was no AI in it whatsoever. AI really hadn't matured enough at that point in time. And as a result, every few days, every few weeks, a programmer needed to go to that system to adjust it, to tune it, to suit the environment. Now, the reality is the environment is dynamic. People change. They change their habits. You could be having a meal on Sunday with 15 people, and then the following Sunday, nothing happens, and nobody's home. You could be out. A system needs to be able to adjust for that and adjust for that automatically. You can't have these teams of programmers behind the scenes tweaking all of this. And also, conversely, if you have a video feed type mechanism, such as some companies have proposed, is unbelievably expensive because you need to have people watching those feeds to identify whether there's a problem or not. The reality is that the monitoring technology that exists today is suboptimal on a number of fronts. And I do point at the companies making the lanyards and the buttons on the walls. They're not working. Now, it's a bold claim, but the reality is the majority of people don't wear them. The majority of people certainly don't wear them in the most critical areas, which is the bathroom. My mother and father have two brand new lanyards that they have sitting by their bedside table. It's in their box. They've never taken it out of the box. My mother just refuses to wear it because she's quite stubborn in that regard. She's also not comfortable with using it because it labels her as old. So there is negative perception around that area of technology. Oh, sorry, back to you, Mark.
It is interesting in the work we've done in diabetes when we're talking about sort of the blood glucose measuring devices. If you go out with a group of people, typically you might put your phone on the table, you might take your watch off and put it on the table sometimes, and you put that out as almost a sense of ownership or pride. But you don't generally take out your blood glucose monitor and put it on the table. You don't put out your, any of those sort of things. So it is, as a device goes, it's not something really you actually necessarily want to share with everyone and let them know, unless they're close members. And if the interesting thing about the application of artificial intelligence, especially around sort of the monitoring, is obviously making sense of the data, making better decisions. If you were looking at this sort of area, so if my pet is in a kennel, they'll give me a webcam and you can log in and have a look at it. When my child's at childcare, they won't allow you to have access to that webcam unless because of the privacy legislation and all that sort of stuff, unless you sign all sorts of forms. In a care setting, how much of this is under the control, or do you perceive as under the control of the individual? And are they seeing this as a big brother thing, or is this really a thing that actually enables them to experience freedom of choice for longer? It's assisted living, and it's assisted as opposed to basically sort of Big Brother sort of watching them. And sort of the second part to that question, I think we spoke about this quickly yesterday, is usually when people go into a full care facility, it's not because they wake up and say that themselves. It's usually their families that have said, we are afraid that something is going to happen to them in this environment, and we cannot check that regularly. How do you see AI solving that, or assisting in solving that problem?
A good question. So the main motivator to have my mother and father, for example, moved into an aged care facility is the perception of risk and perception of response. Now, what I mean by that is I'm in my 50s now. My mother and father are in their 90s. I have a perception of their risk. It's not real, but I have a perception that maybe they could have a fall. What happens if this happens? Would somebody be there to look after them if it did happen, and how would I know? So that perception of risk is the primary motivator for concerned and well-meaning individuals to then make the very difficult decision in consultation with mum and dad to move them into a care facility. Now, very rarely do you have that transition happen smoothly. In a lot of cases, the people that we're trying to care for resist this, they don't want it, they struggle against it, they don't have the same perception of risk as the children do, so we end up with tensions building and so forth. Now, the technology that we have, simply put, goes into the home to try and dispel that perception and to try and give a realistic image of how that home is working and how those individuals work within the home. I think it's appropriate at this point just to set the context right for me to explain how that works. I mentioned before little sensors that we install in the home. These are sensors like a burglar alarm. So we have a motion detector and we have a door open close sensor. These sensors, we would install maybe 6 to 8 of those in critical areas in the home, such as the bedroom, the bathroom, and the kitchen. We may install one on the Webster pack or the area where you'd keep your medicine and so forth, so we can then keep tabs of some of the things that are going on within that home. Now, that data is all sent through to our little speaker hub, the device that you see on the wall behind, and that data stays there. So from a privacy perspective, the data does not leave the home. All of the artificial intelligence that we have within the product developed by Deakin University is within the small processor that we have within the hub. And that's a critical thing to recognize. So we're not sending, at worst case, a video feed out to the cloud, which some nefarious individual may or may not gain access at a later stage. So all the data, that very personal data, is stored within the home. Now, in terms of permission, we do take this very, very seriously. By no means would we covertly install a system into somebody's home and then start monitoring them. This has to be done with awareness for these people. But the logic is very simple. We're not taking pictures of you. All we're doing is tracking your movement, understanding where you are within the home, and then extrapolating whether the behavior that you're exhibiting can be regarded as normal or whether something odd has happened. Now, let me address the second part of this, because there's perception of risk and then there's response to an incident. So when an incident occurs, such as somebody falling over in home, right now the response is, if you've got a lanyard or if you've got a button, then you press it if you can gain access to it. But there are just too many examples of people that have that technology who cannot reach the technology when the catastrophic fall happens. And there's too many situations where people have perished in their homes. There's nobody that's come to visit them. Nobody knew that they'd fallen over and broken their hip and so forth. And the technology was out of reach for them at this point in time. So this second part of what we do from a system is we try and identify when something odd happens within the home. We're not detecting a fall. Let me make that perfectly clear. If you slip over and fall in the bathroom, that's not what we detect. We only have 2 sensors that go into the bathroom. One's on the door and one's on the wall. Those sensors give a feed of data coming through to our system to say that somebody is in the bathroom, somebody has closed the door, and we extrapolate from that because we can monitor things like temperature and humidity and vibration and so forth. We know there's appropriate activity within that bathroom area. So what happens is, as the system gets to know the occupants of the home, and this takes about 2 weeks, this is the learning process of the system, the artificial intelligence is doing nothing more than learning what the occupant of the home is doing. Once we've got to a high enough confidence level, and this is a piece of maths that we've developed within the system, so once the confidence level reaches a certain level, then the system then moves to, instead of learning, into monitoring mode. So it has got to a point where it is comfortable with what normal is. So if you're in the bathroom type situation and something odd happens, if you do fall over in the bathroom, the system doesn't detect that you fall over in the bathroom, but it does detect that something odd has happened. The mathematics is expecting you to have left the bathroom by that time. The mathematics would have expected the shower to have been turned off and the vibrations to have changed, but it didn't. So it sees that there's a deviation from norm, and once that deviation from norm reaches a certain threshold, then we trigger. Now, this is a critical thing. What we trigger at this point is nothing to do with AI. This is an escalation protocol that we built within the product right from day one. That little device that you see, the hub, has a speaker inside it, and that speaker will fire up, and it'll ask some very basic questions. Are you okay? And if that person doesn't respond, which is our default, because if they're fallen over, maybe they've knocked themselves unconscious and they won't be able to respond, then after a few iterations of that, we will then call in help. We will then call in a carer, a next-door neighbor, or whoever's programmed in the system or set up in the system to have a phone number there that we would then reach. Now, we have addressed then three different things. We have the perception of risks changes to real risk. People will be able to look at reports based on historical data to find out how mum and dad or their children are going. They will then be able to look at a managed response if an incident does occur. And at the same time, we have looked after individuals' privacy and privacy, because all of that data is looked after within the technology, within the home, with their consent. And I do stress with their consent. By no means would we be installing anything into someone's home without their consent. Ultimately, and I know this sounds like a bit of a pitch for what we're doing at Unisono, the whole company motto is to allow people to lead empowered, independent lives in their own homes for as long as possible. And I have to admit, from me as a child of elderly parents, I would love that for my mum and dad. They're gagging for the technology, even though they both are not technologists. And I know pretty much everybody else that I speak to about what we're doing within the company. Everybody we have in the company has people that are just clamoring for it, saying, I want this now.
Yeah, it does seem to be, obviously, human nature says you only read bad things and bad press about things. Driverless cars, you only hear about the one accident it's had, not the 50,000 accidents it's avoided in the first place, and those sort of things. And yeah. from the pure amount of data, and our cohort and our team have basically always said is, if you want to change something, you need to have a measurement, right? You need to measure it first. You need to know what your status actually is. So you need to have those little sensors. And the technology is not in those sensors. Those sensors are effectively have been around for dozens of years now. It's just that it seems that asking, in my case, my elderly parents to use a smartphone app, that sort of thing, is for us might be easy, but for them it's not. They're used to normal phones. For asking them even to carry around a device that's always on is not something that they'll basically want to do. Asking them to wear a pendant or a wristband that identifies them of perhaps something they don't want to publicly acknowledge, that you might have problems or what have you. You don't really want to wear that on the outside. So surely something like an AI engine basically makes sense, because it learns what's normal for you and then in real time actually enacts. And over the last sort of 5 years where we've seen this technology in the periphery, how do you think this needs to be positioned to the individuals within a care facility? Is that just that this is it's not invasive? It's actually the opposite of this. It's passively in the background watching and learning and making sure that if there is a problem, it comes in. Is that sort of the angle that you'll probably take, or is it? Yeah. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, I agree. It is a passive technology which is designed to sit in the background and only interact with you if necessary. Now, when we did the original trials for the system, much in the way of feedback came through in terms of what we could do with the system. We have a speaker in the home, and we have the ability to speak to people in the home. So we have added a whole vocabulary of potential memory joggers and reminders for people that would be accepting of them. And again, all of these are tunable. We can either turn them all off and we just have the anomaly monitoring capability that we've spoken of before, or we can turn them all on and you'll have the system saying, well, by the way, you've been sitting for 3 hours, maybe it's time to have a little bit of a walk and have a glass of water. One of the things I do find most alarming is that the quantity of people over the age of 65 who are admitted to hospital with urinary tract infections. Now, that statistic is very high. It's one of the highest rates of readmission into hospital that exists in the westernized world today, which is primarily caused by lack of hydration. When they're in hospital, they usually have antibiotics, they have a drip, they're rehydrated. Once they've reached a steady position, then they're discharged, they go back home, and they do exactly the same behavior they do before. With our system, we know whether they've had a glass of water or not, or we have a good estimation as to whether they've had a glass of water or not. and we'll provide an appropriate reminder to them that maybe it's a time to have this. Now, we've taken this to one stage further with medication reminders. Adhering to appropriate prescription timetables is a critical thing. Now, most people are pretty good at this, but if you have early onset dementia, that can be a very, very difficult thing to do. So we built two models, a pessimistic model and an optimistic model within the system. An optimistic model assumes that you will optimistically take your medicine at the right time, so the system will not interact with you at all. But if it detects that you haven't actually been able to get to your medicine box or your Webster pack or whatever it may be, then the system will provide you a reminder, say 10 minutes after the fact. So it knows whether you've been in the environment, it knows whether you've opened the cupboard with the medicine in it and so forth. So we can easily extrapolate that. The optimistic model is the pessimistic model is where we take a completely different view. We take the opposite view that you probably will forget. So if we know that you haven't taken your medicine and we know it's 5 minutes before your time to take your pills and potions, then we'll then provide that reminder so you stay on track with that. Now, certainly the activity that we have with the system and the trials that we have right now, that part of the system is being very, very well received. And so we've added extra capability into the speech engine of the system so that it does interact with people verbally many, many times during the day if it's something that they want. All of these things are tunable and they can be turned off at any time. There is a user interface that the carer would have which allows those things to be tuned, turned on and off. And I do echo your point, Mark. Yeah, my dad, his idea of a mobile phone is it's off in his pocket, and when he wants to make a phone call, he turns it on. Now, my dad's a clever guy. He's a physicist, and for him to not have comprehended for the last 15 years of him having a mobile phone that you can leave it on 24/7, and all you need to do is charge it when you get back home, annoys everybody in the family enormously. But it does go to show that a lot of people within a certain age group have a different way of using technology. And one of the things we like about the way we've developed this technology is they don't have to interact with it if they don't want to. They don't have to wear with anything. They don't have to remember to charge anything. They don't have to put a wristwatch on. They don't have to put a lanyard around their neck and so forth. So in terms of acceptance within the cohort we're going for, the acceptance is very, very high.
So we've got some quite a few questions coming through in the background. So you've seen me probably flicking on different screens, and I've had polls that I haven't put up in essence. But if you don't mind, so as we wrap through, we'll just go through those specific questions that we've got here. So one out of New South Wales at the moment is there anything realistically you can't monitor or shouldn't monitor in a care facility? Was one of the questions.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. One thing I should stress, the usability of what we've developed within Unisono, Sophie, works well within an aged care environment. It works very well within a domestic home or apartment type environment. The user interface usually changes within that sense. In terms of things that we can sense today, if you look at it in terms of what the sensors do, those sensors give us actually a wide range of information. Accelerometer data, so movement, we get temperature, humidity, we get UV light. I have no idea why we monitor UV light, but the sensors do monitor UV light. All of the sensors are designed to work inside a home, so monitoring UV light there is moot. And obviously then we have door open and close and movement data. So all of that data is collected and then used as the AI engine requires it and as the developers develop it. Are we at a point where we are happy with that? Actually, I would argue that this is a constant area of innovation. We have a project at the university this afternoon deciding off the next series of development work we're doing with them. And within that, we are researching whether we can use a different set of sensors to give us much more granular view of what's taking place within the home. Now, what I'm looking at here is an array sensor, which would allow us to detect whether somebody is standing, sitting, moving, lying prone on the floor, these types of things within a single room type environment. So we'd have one sensor per room. Now, we are very mindful today, this is a self-install model, 6 to 8 sensors. If we can cut the quantity of sensors down, that makes it more cost effective. And if we can increase the performance or the capability of those sensors, then that works to our advantage as well. Now, the ability of this sensor, assuming that we complete the research side of things, we should be having that to at an early trial stage at mid this year. So we're accelerating that very quickly. Obviously, it is in the research stage at this point in time, so by no means is that a commitment to market. But we are looking at other sense technology that we can incorporate into this. We are researching also a sensor that can be placed under the mattress, permanently wired into power, which can monitor heart rate at night, monitor sleep patterns, and so forth. So I think at the moment, in terms of our sensors that we place in a bedroom, we know somebody is in a bedroom. What we don't know is whether they're in bed or out of bed at the moment. And that data, I think, is a critical piece of data, particularly during those nighttime hours.
It's interesting. There was a statement here that just came up from Perth, which is obviously quite early for them, is that I have a family member that's quite far away from the family and from different time zones, and we've been given many calls out of hours for things we couldn't do anything about. How do you see AI actually helping service that particular area? So I guess in this case, somebody called them, like an alarm company called them or something. Is that right, David? That somebody called them and actually, there's nothing they could do about it because they were, 4,000 kilometers away.
Yeah, that's a challenge. The way the system is designed today is first of all, to remove as many false positives and false negatives. That's why we ultimately built the speaker within the home. So hopefully, if there is a situation where we've got too many erroneous situations happening, those will be minimized as much as possible. So that's the first thing I'd say there. The AI engine that we built within this system is not a response system. It doesn't respond itself. It is designed at the most critical level. If, say, for example, somebody has a problem, does fall in the bathroom, and the system detects that there's a deviation from normal, it will trigger that process. But that process is to alert people to that situation. It doesn't have the ability to take action beyond that. So once we've alerted those individuals, it is those individuals' responsibility to do that. If distance is an issue, in a lot of cases, the main client that we would look towards having on board with Unisono are the care providers that exist today. And they would have a network of care providers and support people who could then attend to that person if required, and hopefully they would be a little bit closer. So that would be the main typical deployment. In terms of escalation procedure, again, we can build in the phone numbers, usually mobile numbers, of the next door neighbor, the carer, a family member, whoever is deemed appropriate to look after that person in the event an escalation is required.
So someone else was talking here about they've got their parents have a personal alarm, and similar to what you echoed, is they don't really use it. What do you see as help for people outside of the monitoring area? So if somebody leaves their monitored home or their monitored area, what do you see as AI contributing in that space?
Absolutely nothing right now is the answer to that question, unfortunately. The difficulty that we have with monitoring people in the home with current technology, lanyards and so forth, is a known state. Tracking somebody when they leave, particularly when you have, say, a night wandering situation occurring or somebody that just goes for a walk and gets lost, is tricky. There are developments from a technology standpoint where we could embed something or place something into a handbag or into a walking frame, a walking stick, and so forth. But these are emerging technologies. I don't see anything that is at the commercial level at this point. With that said, though, that there has been some very good development in the area of wearables, where the batteries, so it's GPS, it connects to a cellular network, it identifies where the location of the person is, so there is if you like, a geofence that can be created, and the battery life of those devices last, I understand, up to 2 years. Now, I haven't cited that technology myself, and I am an engineer from many, many years ago, and I do question whether that is a bona fide working solution at this point in time, but I'd love to look at that. So in terms of where Unisono is today, it is designed to operate within an aged care facility. It's designed to operate in a care facility. It's got nothing to do with age. and it's designed to work in an apartment or in a home. Outside of the home is outside of scope for us at the moment, but we are genuinely looking at potential partnerships and doing other development ourselves to see if we can provide a good solution for that moving forward. It's not an easy one, because at the moment, everything we're doing in Unisono is passive. We mount the sensors on the wall, the kitchen, bathroom, and so forth, and that's done. Nobody then needs to interact with the system. As soon as someone transitions out, that gets complicated. My last point I do mention, though, is one of the things that we do monitor is things like night wandering, and this works in a care facility and as well as a home. So if we detect that somebody normally would have gone to the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning, for example, and then gone to bed, and then they don't come back to bed, then we can have an alert trigger at that point in time so that somebody could be notified that there is a potential risk of night wandering taking place.
Well, from a time perspective, I thank you very much for your time, and for those that have that attended as well. It is basically very, very enlightening as to what actually is possible. Certainly, from an artificial intelligence in real, what I effectively saying is real-time artificial intelligence, and already the feedback we're getting here is to actually say is. The last question as we wrap up is, what don't you want to see happen with sort of artificial intelligence technology? What do you think it doesn't really add value to?
I think artificial intelligence has an enormous role to play in human life for many, many years to come. It is probably the most profound thing to happen for humankind since the wheel. That's a big statement, and I recognize that it's a big statement. But for the first time, computers will start doing things that human beings would do. I'm talking about driving cars. The employment landscape over the next 10 to 15 years will change fundamentally because of this. Now, a lot of people get scared about that, and they say, oh, we need legislation to protect it and so forth. I don't think that is where we need to go, because technology just has a tendency of just steamrolling over those sorts of things. It is inevitable because it's the way we as human beings have developed and will continue to develop. With that said, though, we need to be mindful that artificial intelligence is useless without data. So without data, without sense, it has nothing. So I don't expect AI to be in an area where you wouldn't see large volumes of data, whether gathered in real time or something that where a large database already exists. So I expect us to see in the near term applications of AI being applied. A good example is the one in America right now with a tax accountant with an AI engine trying to find you better tax returns, which I think is a laudable thing to go after. And if an AI engine can do that, spectacular. There are some things that AI is really good at, managing big data and managing multiple sources of data simultaneously. Human beings are really bad at juggling more than 3 or 4 simultaneous things at the same time. An AI engine genuinely doesn't care. It can handle as many as it's told to manage. So I think we need to go after the sweet spots of what AI can definitely do. Now, I look at what we're doing at Unisono, and we're just starting. The AI models, though, have been developed over a 20-year period by the university. So this is not something that is not mature. It actually is remarkably mature. Imagine what it's going to do in another 10 years, another 20 years. That's going to be an exciting place to be. And maybe just to wrap up, I do echo what I said right at the beginning, and I genuinely mean it, and a lot of other people do in the tech space as well. We are witnessing the birth of the 4th iteration of the Industrial Revolution. A very profound moment to see and to recognize that we're just about to go into it instead of looking back in hindsight.
And for some people that basically is incredibly scary, whereas for others, again, sort of just wrapping up in quoting sort of that IBIS report, sort of the chairman of IBIS, when you're talking about labor and labor force in this area, is that their particular quote was that probably the largest change to working demographic during the Industrial Revolution was sort of the invention of the tractor for farms, because you used to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people doing very, very manual tasks, but a tractor allowed that to happen differently. Now, are there less people employed on a farm doing picking or doing things that way? Yes, but are there less people employed in agriculture? No. So from this particular area, it does seem there'll be a profound shift. As you say, AI might be able to get the data about what people are doing. It might escalate that there is a higher probability that something has now gone wrong, but somebody still, or some person still needs to go and interact with that person, because care, after all, is a very human business, and that bit of it is very much human to human, that you want someone to come in. So yes, have a speaker, ask, are you okay? Have an escalation hierarchy, but then eventually a human does need to actually step in.
Very much so.
So Ian, thank you very, very much for your time, a few questions. And for those of you that, there are a few people that registered and did not attend this morning, they will actually get obviously a copy of this presentation we recorded. You will all have access to this presentation and a transcript of it pretty much from very, very early next week. And for those of you that have any other questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to myself. Our details are on the screen there. Or when we send you a link to a copy of this presentation, you're more than welcome to ask a question then. So without further ado, thank you, Ian, for your time. Most enlightening about the positives and benefits of AI in the space. And to all of everyone else, thank you for attending, and we look forward to catching up with you soon.
Superb. Thank you, Mark. Absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
Yes. Bye-bye.